Hey everyone, this is Valentina Flores, CEO of Sentry, and this is the Ctrl-Alt-Secure podcast where we talk all things cybersecurity. Today we have kind of a unique one because we're talking about all things medical device testing, and we brought on two experts in that area. Specifically, we have Rob Packard, who's an expert in FDA compliance and medical devices specifically. And we also brought on Andrés Peña, who leads our penetration testing here at Sentry. So we have kind of two sides of the house, and we're going to talk about medical devices and how they can be more secure, especially going into 2024. So start out with Rob. What's your background and your current role?
My background is chemical engineering, not software at all. And the 70s have called and said they want their programming language back. So I don't get involved in coding at all. But because I used to code back when it was machine language and BASIC and Pascal and things like that, I know how to code in terms of the strategy and the approach. I've done code reviews back in the olden days. So when I am visiting companies, I audit the companies for their programming to make sure that they're following the ISO standards that are specific to medical devices for software development, software lifecycle. And because our company prepares regulatory submissions to the FDA and other countries, we're always coaching them on what documentation they need for cybersecurity and software documentation, including patches and upgrades. And even when they have something like a recall, because there's a harmful problem with their software, and it might even represent a safety concern, we'll help them with how to document that, revalidate it, and make sure something like that doesn't happen again.
So you mentioned kind of the audit process and the coaching and stuff. What are the different services that Medical Device Academy provides?
Our primary service is we actually prepare the actual submission that goes to the FDA. So that doesn't mean writing the documents that would be in a software development section or a cybersecurity section, but we do provide the templates and we explain the guidance documents that they might not be familiar with. And we're preparing all the administrative things that go along with it, like cover letters and comparison tables with existing products that are on the market, labeling, things like that.
Awesome. Andres, you want to talk a little bit about your background and your role?
Yeah, sure. I share a common background with Rob since I don't come initially from IT systems. I come from an economics background. I turned a programmer and then turned an ethical hacker. I started my journey in the IT world 5 years ago, first in web development and then into cybersecurity. As of now, I have conducted and supervised over 300 offensive cybersecurity projects, and I'm currently a lead penetration tester at Sentry.
Awesome. So, Rob, let's kind of jump into medical devices. What makes them unique to other software or other devices out there?
I think that the software, from a technical standpoint, isn't any different from other products that have software and firmware. What's different is the people that are doing the work may not be familiar with the cybersecurity documentation requirements and the software validation requirements because they have different standards that are specific to medical. In many cases, they're not even as advanced as what Andreas would be familiar with for the financial community. The financial community is far ahead, so is military. There are so many industries that are ahead of medical devices. But at the same time, we have things like pacemakers and surgical robots that are working remotely doing surgery on people. And the people assume that, if I have a username and password, that's enough. And they have no idea how far they are from being actually secure. And things like the WannaCry ransomware attack have opened up the government's eyes to, hey, you actually have a serious weakness here. And the people that are doing the work, even though they might be qualified to program, they may not be qualified to make the programming secure because it wasn't part of the spec when they put together a quote to create somebody's software.
Yeah, and we talk about the technology stack so often and we focus on the technical, obviously, but just thinking about it from like a hacker's perspective, there's so much vulnerability in these medical devices. You mentioned the pacemakers. So it's a huge target regardless of the technology behind it. And then, like you said, often in these industries that are most vulnerable, there's like the biggest skill gap in cybersecurity. So it's definitely a huge threat and a huge opportunity for hackers. So, Andres, if you can kind of lead us into how security plays into these devices.
Sure. First, I will try to lay down some definitions because it's hard. When talking about security, usually people don't understand completely how it works because it works kind of from a black box perspective. Like nobody knows about how cybersecurity is important. They just know like after they have been hacked. So let's try to lay down some definitions like what cybersecurity cares about. Cybersecurity cares about primarily three things, which are called CIA triad, which are confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information systems. The next key thing to define is what is an information system then? And well, that's a really broad term that could be defined in many ways, but let's try to keep it simple. An information system, as its name suggests, is just a set of components interacting to handle data-related tasks like transmission, storage, and processing of different data formats. In that regard, I think we can then jump into the conclusion that a medical device is, from our point of view, an information system that serves a critical function, which is to interact directly or indirectly with a patient as part of the data flow. In some cases, the thing with medical devices is that they could be used in delicate environments like operating rooms, where unexpected behavior obviously can put somebody's life at risk. So in general, to understand what is the security posture of a medical device, it's important to understand first its architecture. So the way it's developed. Rob already said a couple of keywords there, like for instance, firmware in the case of embedded systems and software in the case of computers. And also, I would say the biggest challenge when trying to assess a medical device is to understand its business logic, because medical devices come in many forms and serve different purposes. You could have like a medical device which could be portable, which you could use in your own house to monitor some different signs from your body, or you could have others which interact directly through a surgery with your own body. So being able to understand all of the logic behind of it, its context of use and its development, it's key to preserve confidentiality, integrity, and availability whenever possible.
Rob, so I guess backing up a step, Andres kind of got us back to basics with the definitions. The reason we started talking, Rob, we met talking about the new FDA requirements coming out, which are constantly updating, maybe not as fast as we'd like them to be, right, Rob? The FDA recently released some new information around penetration testing and vulnerability management. So that's a lot of the times why people are getting these tests done. How do the manufacturers, from your perspective, how do they view security?
Most of the companies start out when they're developing a new product, they're trying to avoid the cybersecurity documentation. So they're like, well, we'll just turn off the wireless functionality and then we won't have to worry about this. Or we just won't have a wireless device. And the first thing the customer asks is, well, is this going to communicate with our hospital information system? You're like, well, no, that'll be in our next version. And so that goes over like a lead brick. They don't want to hear it's not going to talk to the hospital information system, and they don't want to hear that it's not wireless. They want to have it work with everything, just like we want our cell phone to work with our car and our refrigerator and everything else. Right. But when the company goes the next step and says, okay, we're going to add the wireless functionality, they have to worry about not only do they have an encrypted system, but it's got to communicate the information to a hospital information system. And it's got to do it in a way that you don't have mix-up of data, you don't have loss of data, you don't have delays in delivery of the data. And so when I ask companies like, where's your risk analysis? There are no risks. It's software. It can't hurt somebody. I'm like, well, those labs that you just took from the instrument and you sent to the hospital information system, if you tell me my blood glucose is really low and I treat for low, but it was really actually very high, and there's some sort of a mix-up of data, you just killed somebody. And vice versa. Or worse, I need this hematocrit value now so I know whether I need to give this person blood or not, and they're in surgery. I'm not going to wait around an hour to know whether I need to give them blood. I need the data to get there now. Oh, well, no signal. Maybe later. Maybe when I go outside to my car, it'll work. That's not going to work. You can't take the lab instrument out to your car. So this is kind of important to people to make sure that you have connectivity with the hospital information system. It's secure. You don't have loss of data. You don't have mix-up of data. You don't have delays of delivery of the data. And if anybody is old enough to even remember the net, the example they gave in there was like, well, we have this politician's data just got manipulated in the cloud. That's a very far-fetched scenario from the standpoint of that's not what hackers are going to usually waste their time doing, but it's not out of the realm of capabilities. We do have the capability of mixing up people's data and editing people's data. And when your entire hospital system becomes hostage to some cyber attack, you have to know how you're going to handle that. And we even get into, it's not just the software, it's also the firmware, because you have to have some sort of wireless chip with an antenna. So you don't just need to worry about the software, you also have hardware components you have to worry about. And a lot of these companies are like, well, I wanted to get the form factor smaller, so we put on our own custom antenna. I'm like, yeah, the FCC might have a problem with that because that antenna you put on isn't certified. The one that was originally intended for that chip was. So now you have to spend another $25,000 for every antenna in every single country where you're going to use that antenna. Well, we want to, of course, sell the product in more than one country. So we just racked up a $250,000 bill just by using a custom antenna to get the form factor smaller. So there's a lot of consideration. Just because I want Bluetooth does not mean, oh, I just snap my fingers and now I have Bluetooth and everything's secure.
Yeah.
No, I just don't load on malware protection and everything's solved. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, you're talking about the operating room and trying to get it closer to signal. I mean, think about a pacemaker, like trying to stand next to a window to make sure your pacemaker's functioning,
Yeah, tilt the patient a little bit so we can get a better signal. That's not how it works. It's tilt the patient so I could do surgery.
And like Andres said, that there's just so much mystery around cybersecurity, and it's always this very daunting and overwhelming thing until you do it. And you mentioned the risk assessments. Until you get that first risk assessment, you have no idea the different risks that are there in a company. So getting that first one done is always overwhelming.
My list that I get the first time is usually about this long in an Excel spreadsheet. And I just want to say, please start over again and read this document. But they don't want to hear that. It's like, okay, there's a 6-page table giving you examples. Maybe we should start there.
We know, and I'm sure you're the same way, we know that cybersecurity and auditing is like this necessary evil. It's looked at like, I don't want to deal with these people, but I have to. So sometimes when people come to us, it's automatically like this negative thing from the start, and it's up to us to kind of change that mindset. But I mean, we're going through our audit process right now, and every time they send me an email, I'm like, ugh, more about the audit. So it's definitely a hard thing to get people proactive and excited about. But, as the compliance frameworks change, more and more people are having to get it done. So it's definitely not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, those audits should just be proactive things that help you identify things you missed, not a necessary evil.
Right.
Everybody should be jumping up and down for joy when they found something because you found it before the hacker did.
Yeah, that's not usually the case. But yeah, that is the mindset that we'd like to get people into. And it's just a lot of education. And that's the same from your side. I know you guys do a lot of education and just trying to explain those ideas to people. Andre, so Rob just talked a lot about different examples. I know you've been leading a lot of the medical device tests specifically at Red Sentry the last few months since that FDA change. Can you talk about some of the most common vulnerabilities that you're finding, things that other medical devices out there, if they are being proactive, things that they should look out for?
Sure. And I think that's a really good question, because when working with typical IT systems, it's really easy for us to a degree to enumerate assets in terms of, okay, these are the hosts, these are the networks, these are the protocols and the application. And most of them follow kind of the same pattern of behavior. But in the case of medical devices, like I mentioned earlier, our experience is that they come in many different ways and they interact with the patient and with the environment in many different ways. Sometimes, and this is related to what Rob said, sometimes they just altogether skip any wireless functionality or skip any connectivity between, like, let's say, operating systems of different hosts. So when we're dealing with those cases, we need to really understand what is the importance of the data that is being processed inside the device and how that is being communicated to the outside, in which format, which could be an image, which could be sound. So we need to deeply understand the device in order to see what are the potential threats and vulnerabilities that it could have. But one thing that I do have noticed in my experience working with medical devices is that typically when they try to design architecture that involves computers and connectivity, whether it is via Ethernet or EtherCAT, is that usually they are not that concerned, or they do not anticipate the potential tampering which could have place either physical or digitally. So one of the things that I have seen is that it's not that difficult to disassemble part of the device in order to interact with different ports from the embedded computer that there is in. And once we have access to those computers, usually the software is not following any best practices. It is just like running the software using like default passwords or things like that we encounter a lot in different IT systems. So I would say the most common vulnerabilities are related to the way they protect physically and digitally their computers.
Okay. So for anyone prioritizing security or they're about to go through their first pen test, do you have any like advice for them? I guess that's what they should focus on is like the physical and digital security.
Yeah, and this again touches Rob's comment on people do not care too much about cybersecurity in the early stages of development, and that is the key feature that they should instead do. Whenever talking about cybersecurity in any type of system, whether it is a network, like a new device, or an application, the industry should follow what is called a shift left perspective or philosophy. That is adding cybersecurity concerns in the earlier stages of development, like right where the idea grew up in the beginning. So they start thinking about, okay, I have this idea, I want this to be done, but how these different end users or different actors could interact with this or could abuse my idea in order to obtain or to leverage it for their own purposes. So that's what I would suggest to most industries and to most people out there, to take cybersecurity throughout the whole life cycle and not only at the end when releasing the product.
Yeah, that's a good call out, the shift left. And we even struggle with that sometimes. Like we have a software platform and it's just so easy to try to move fast in those early stages. And then you end up having to go back and duplicate, triplicate work because you didn't do it like the security way the first time. So that's a really good call out, bringing the security mindset in on the front end. Say it's not just for best security practices, like it saves you a lot of work as you move forward. So yeah, that's a good call out for sure.
I think I have a good comment on that. Just like Andreas was saying, people think about the security after they built the product instead of it being part of the thought process before you've written any code. If they were designing a medical device that needed to be sterilized, one of the first things they would ask themselves is, what materials can I use that are compatible with the sterilization method? And that exact same mentality is exactly the mentality that they should have for security. They should say, what security controls should I use when I develop this hardware and software? Right. And that they ask me, well, when do I need to do the cybersecurity? And they think I'm going to give them an answer like a week before you submit. And I'm like, no. The same time you were making that decision about what plastic to use, what metal to use, that's exactly when you needed to be worrying about it, because it's a prerequisite to building your software, not an afterthought of your software. And to give you an idea of how brutal these brand new regulations are, in the brand new FDA version 5.0 eStar that they published on December 6th, they've actually got a list of 8 different cybersecurity controls. And those are authentication controls, authorization controls, cryptography controls, code data execution integrity controls, confidentiality controls, event detection and logging controls, resiliency and recovery controls, firmware and software update controls. So those 8 things they list.
So everything.
They don't just say these are suggested. They say, what page numbers can we find these cybersecurity controls covered in your cybersecurity documentation?
Yeah.
What page number? For all 8, not pick and choose which ones you like. We want to see all 8. And like, okay, whatever you did before isn't going to cut it. Whatever Band-Aid you put on to try to show them that you're securing it, that's not going to cut it. Blow up whatever you wrote, start over again, because now you have to have all 8 of these things in here as a minimum. And don't stop there. You keep on brainstorming of other ways you can secure this. And I'm just like, everything that everybody's been doing over the last year and they're planning on submitting now, just chuck it in the garbage.
Yeah. Well, first of all, in the sterilization, I love a good analogy, Rob. That was like a perfect analogy for what Andres was saying. And yeah, for the evidence you're having to show on these testing, it's because for so long we were doing a one-time vulnerability scan, printing it out, and then using it as evidence on 30 different parts of the compliance that it really wasn't evidence for. And so we love seeing, not just for personal benefit, but we love seeing companies or regulatory agencies kind of getting more strict with that and getting more focused on the different industries and who needs segmentation and who needs this, and really focusing on what industry needs what checks. And I think that's going to make all companies a lot more secure going forward.
I would like to add something related to this, is that I see the same pattern in the medical industry right now as it was some years ago with the operational technology world, like this world which deals with water plants and electricity plants and critical infrastructure, and then with the IoT world, which is bringing all of that in operational technology to the house or to different facilities with internet capabilities. So at first, people weren't expecting those to be abused. So there was like an open highway for threat actors to go in there and to cause havoc by using many different techniques. Those are by today being correctly assessed. And whenever thinking about the design of those systems, cybersecurity is always a concern. I think we're seeing that new cycle occurring right now in the medical device industry.
And even with all of those regulations that now exist in that industry, we're still seeing those systems hacked. I mean, at a huge rate. You know, at the Pennsylvania Water Authority, I don't remember which one it was, but I just saw they were hacked last week. And no matter how many cybersecurity things you do, you're not unhackable, but it just shows we have to keep working in that direction. And to that point, Rob, the FDA just released a new set. What do you see for like kind of the future of FDA security compliance? Like, do you think it'll be another 10 years before we see something, or do you think it's going to be constant? What's your opinion there?
There's only really one strong guidance document out there that's being used. That's Amy's TIR 57. And the fact that it's an American standard rather than an international standard is concerning right there. There's no analogous version for an ISO version. And when you look at what's required for other countries, they're just starting to ask for what the FDA was asking for several years ago. So the FDA is ahead of it, but the FDA is still, as Andrés said, 10 years behind. They're acting like the operation industry would act years ago, and the technology is there for the hackers in today's world. So they're not really going to have a hard time hacking into this open highway of medical devices with publicly available instructions on what wireless card are you using and what version is it, and here's the version of my software, and oh, here's a list of all my software that I'm using it off the shelf, and let's see what I can do today. So I'm seeing that the TIR 57 document that was created by AAMI in 2016 is going to have to be completely rewritten and really have to jump ahead a decade to even be worth publishing. But they rely on medical device industry volunteers to participate in those committees and write the new version. No, I'm not. I wouldn't even be qualified. One of my team members would be.
Okay.
But unfortunately, they're looking for volunteers. We teach classes for AMI.
Okay.
And we write training courses, but actually participating in the standard for TIR 57, we haven't gotten involved in that. And I keep on encouraging, like, Mary or Bhumika, if you want to jump on to those committees, please do. It's personal recognition for them as a contributor to that standard. It'll bring us firsthand knowledge about what's going to be required before anybody else knows, but also it's needed. The industry needs this new technology to be in standards. So now we have regulation, we have guidance documents, we have templates that the FDA wants you to fill in, but where's the guidance document to train industry on that's international? There isn't one. And what we do have is TIR 57, but it's way too old. It needs to be completely revamped. And it'll be interesting to see how industry copes with that. But you've got a whole ton of devices out there that people said, oh, I'll just have this, I'll add a Bluetooth wireless card to this device and a custom antenna. I'll have it communicate with an Android or an Apple phone, and I'm off to the races and I can sell this thing like hotcakes. And the hackers are saying, come to Papa. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, it's wild. It's a wild, wild west out there. Andrés, any final thoughts, advice?
Well, I would still recommend taking seriously cybersecurity when in designing phase. I know it's hard to think about security at all when trying to deal with the different financial situations, like having to shorten the time to market to release something, having to increase sales quite rapidly. Part of my background as an economist allows me to understand why this situation happens at all and why these security concerns are not being correctly fixed from the beginning. But the thing is, if you think in forward thinking terms, you're going to see that the key, at least from the view of cybersecurity practitioners, is to be able to develop a common language or common ground with people from business to be able to convey all of the possible cost of not addressing those problems in earlier stages, and to prepare a quantitative analysis and qualitative as well to make them see how important it is cybersecurity nowadays, that now that our systems in critical infrastructure, in medical devices, at home are all interconnected.
Yep, agree totally. Rob, any final thoughts?
I know in the quality world, they have a concept called cost of quality. Has anybody ever used the jargon cost of security to explain that concept that Andres was talking about?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it with our clients sometimes in just like the ROI of pen testing, just because ROI is kind of a phrase that they know. And it's like, yes, this pen test might cost X, but getting hacked costs this amount. And it's 1,000 times the amount of that pen test, So we talk in that language sometimes. And it's not just financial repercussions. Reputation is huge. And there's so many things that affect your business once you're hacked. So proactivity is just so important, and we're trying to get people to move to that mindset.
Yeah, they usually use an iceberg model where most of the mass of the iceberg is below the water surface. Mm-hmm. So you've got your pen testing and vulnerability scanning is at the very top, and you have this gigantic iceberg underneath that's all the things that will happen to you and cost you later if you don't do this proactively. And it's not just upgrades and patches, it's the ransomware attacks that have to be paid, and you're also going to have to recreate all that data that you lost and rebuild your system that they just destroyed. And not to mention reputation. If you're the number one leader out there selling software and all of a sudden you get hacked, your system might not be any more or less secure than anybody else's, but the fact that you were the first to get hacked might be because you were first to market.
Exactly. Right.
Those other guys will get picked up as, oh, we're going to go with them because they haven't been hacked yet. Well, yet.
They say no one's as secure as the company that was just hacked 6 months ago, so often those are the more secure ones now. And then when we're talking about medical devices, not just reputation or financial, but now you're talking about potentially human life and even more serious repercussions. So it's definitely not more important in this industry than any other, but it's definitely serious other things going on too. All right, great. Well, that's all I have. I really appreciate you guys being here today. We'll put some links for Medical Device Academy, Red Sentry, if you need any help with FDA compliance, auditing, penetration testing, vulnerability scanning, please reach out and we'll help walk you through that process.
There will be a blog posting tomorrow morning. Tomorrow is going to be the 19th. So we'll have a brand new post. And I was actually reading from that blog when I was listing off the 8 different things and what page number they want. So there's a lot of information in there about what the new requirements are and where to document it. So that'll really help people that are looking.
Rob also has a really extensive YouTube page with a ton of educational resources. So if you're wondering about anything, he's probably done a YouTube video on it. So that can be helpful as well. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Valentina.
Thank you for this space.